top of 13a, but let's just back up to the bottom of 12b, just to get our bearings. Right at the bottom, Lema Katanai. What is it? 1, 2, 3. Actually, that's like really far up. Oh yeah, okay. Fifth line, end of the fifth line from the bottom of 12b. Lema Katanai. So we've been discussing. We're trying to resolve a question in the Gemara by comparing it to another Tanaic argument. Like a person says that this is going to be like a Bechor. Now, of course, the Bechor is Kadosh Merachem. It has intrinsic holiness, but also you're required to set it aside and to designate it. So when you say this is like a Bechor, does it mean a Bechor after I've designated it, or a Bechor from birth? And we'll see the difference in a minute. Rabbi Yaakov was there. Rabbi Yaakov says that is a good vow, and you can make something else also like a Bechor. And Rabbi Yehuda says no. Hey Chidami, what are we talking about? If we're talking about before the throwing of the blood, in other words, before it was sacrificed, designated and sacrificed. My tama, I shouldn't say designated. I should have said actually taken and sacrificed, and then you get to eat the meat. So my tama shari. So, like, why should you be able to permit something that is like a bechor? Before the sacrifice is complete, it's an intrinsically prohibited item, the bechor, and you can't. It's not the valid source for a neder. I'm sorry, and then it is a valid source for a neder, and that's why it is forbidden. After the sacrifice is pleaded my time on the usher, so then there's no way that you can say that it's a valid source for a neder, because it's permitted to be eaten, right? Once it's sacrificed. Oh wow! So it must be the machis basar bechor. Where you've got the meat of a bechor, machis basar deherach kabeh, and there's meat of some other piece of meat is nearby. V'yamar zeh kazeh. He said this one should be like that one. But Tanaim, and it's a matter of the dispute of Tanaim, whether we're talking about the original status of bechor or the current status of bechor, which is permitted. So where says no. That's not how you have to interpret it. You could say as follows: everybody's talking about before it was sacrificed, and it is forbidden to eat. My tamadam shari. So why can't you make a neder to make something like that? In other words, if you make that neder, why is the neder not valid? Because the Torah says the person who makes a neder, ki yidor neder, it's a double language. So you have to make a neder through something, by comparing it to something that is forbidden through another neder, right? So something that is intrinsically kadosh, that is intrinsically forbidden, without you having to say that is not a good handle for a neder. Bechor, it doesn't acquire its forbidden status by declaration, rather by birth. So then Rabbi Yaakov, who says that it is a valid neder, why does he, it doesn't say ki yidor neder, which implies it has to be, the neder has to be attaching to something that is also a neder, that is also forbidding, you're forbidding for yourself. But Yaakov says we have another pasuk that gets us out of that. Amar kra l'Hashem, l'rabos davar aser. The Torah says ki yidor neder l'Hashem. So by saying it's a neder to God, so that implies even something that is forbidden by God. In other words, the bechor, before its sacrifice is forbidden intrinsically by God, as it were, by God's commandment, and it is still ki yidor neder Hashem implies that that's still a valid neder. So okay, it doesn't say Lashem. So how do you explain that? If you're saying it's not a valid handle for a neder, how do you get that? What do you do with the word Lashem? There are certain things that we're going to allow a neder to be attached to that are consecrated to God, but we're going to say those are the chatas and yasham. So if you say this thing is forbidden to me like a chatas or like an asham, which is a sacrifice la Hashem to God, that's what that pasuk refers to. Like that seems arbitrary. Like why would you say la Hashem means this and not that? So marbani chatas yasham shu matpis beneder motzi and yisabachar shehu kadosh mimeimo, because the chatas and asham themselves, they don't have any intrinsic holiness. It's because you declared them as something that is holy to God. So that's why we're going to say that is something that is valid to attach a neder to. But a bechor, we're not going to say that because you did not make the bechor asur or kadosh to begin with. So now back to the other side, like that seems reasonable. Bechor nami my piece of another who a bechor also you designate. The tiny mishum Rabbi Amru minayin l'nolad bechor b'toch beiso shemisal akdisho. They said in the name of Rabbi, there's a mitzvah to even though a bechor is intrinsically kadosh, intrinsically holy, still there's a mitzvah for you to designate it. Shenemar misal akdisho shenemar hazachar takdish. Any male animal firstborn that's born to you, you should sanctify to God. So it implies that you have a role also, even though as we've been saying, it is intrinsically kadosh, you have a role to play in declaring it. And so that would be included in something that is declared, just like the chatas and the yasham are declared, and they are all valid as handles for a neder, that something else is forbidden, just like these are. Uman deshari, so that seems reasonable. What's the other side? Yeah, sure, you have a mitzvah to do it, but it doesn't matter if you do it or not. It's still holy. It's still holy anyway. Okay. Second. Yeah. Okay. So that's the end of that discussion. So now we're back to the Mishnah, which said a whole bunch of phrases. Now this I have to warn you. These coming pieces are my least favorite part of Nedarim because they're completely dependent on, little twists in language and phrases that to us, in a different language and a different time, really have no meaning. But obviously, the Gemara was concerned with common parlance at the time, and so could make these declarations like, saying A means B and saying X means Y, and doesn't mean Z. But it's a little opaque to me. But nonetheless, it's here, and so we're going to cover it. So the Mishnah said, if someone says that this is to me like ke'imra, like a lamb, or kedirim, like the enclosures of the all these things in the Mishnah, the fires, the altar, the mizbeach, the heichal, like Jerusalem, all of these things, these are all considered a good neder, even though he didn't say specifically, like Jerusalem is not something that is forbidden to you, but something, a carbon that you bring to Jerusalem is. So he's implying that he's attaching a neder to things that are forbidden, but he's not stating it straight out. So that works.
I just looked at that. The Mishnah actually uses the same Aramaic we're seeing in the Gemara now. That's really unusual to see Aramaic in the Mishnah.
That's true. Like Imra is Aramaic lamb, right?
Yeah, it's the lamb in Aramaic.
Huh. Yeah. That's very interesting. I didn't pick up on that. Any conclusions?
Maybe that was added to the Mishnah later.
Or edited?
Or edited, yeah.
Okay.
Time to become an academic Talmudist.
Yeah. Okay. So Tana. So we have a brisa, similar thing. Imra leimra keimra. If one uses any of these phrases referring to a lamb, dirim, la dirim, kadirim, like using these, the like or the not or the whatever. Eitzim la eitzim, kaitzim ishim la ishim, kaishim, mizbeach la mizbeach, ka mizbeach, hechal la hechal, ka hechal, Yerushalayim li Yerushalayim, ka Yerushalayim, kulan. All of these, if he says sha'ochal lecha, that like a lamb that of yours which I eat, usher. So that implies that's a good neder. You can't eat. You can't take eat that person's food because you compared it. You basically said it's like a lamb of a korban. But if he says lo ochalach, imra lo ochalach, a lamb I will not eat of yours, mutar, that is permitted. Then it's not a good neder, because I guess the way we understand the phrase is what I don't eat of yours is like a lamb, is like the korban, let's say. So what I do eat of yours is okay. You see what I mean? This is like a little obscure. Which Tana is not does not make a distinction between these three phrases, but they're all the same. Imra leimra keimra. Reb Meir, that's Reb Meir. Ema seifa. But what about the end of this brisa? V'chulan lo ochal lecha mutar. In all of these cases, all of these phrases, if a person says, I will not eat of yours, mutar, that's permitted. That's the end of that brisa. So if that's also Reb Meir Vatnan, la karban lo ochalach, Reb Meir oser. Rabbi Meir said la karban means low karban. It's not a karban. And of that which I will not eat of yours. So Meir says that's no good. So he distinguishes between la karban and karban, or la imra and imra. So which is it? Is this Rabbi Meir or not? Rabbi Abba, Nasak, why is it forbidden? According to Rabbi Meir, Nasak Omer la karban yehei lefikach lo ochalacha. Like your food is going to be to me like a karban, which is the way I would have interpreted it in the first place. So answer is lo kasha, no problem. Ha diamar lo imra, ha diamar le imra. So the lamed can be understood, or well, maybe we're rereading. If it's le imra, like which you could loosely translate it as comparing it to a lamb, that's one thing. But you say la imra, not lamb, that's the opposite. So that's a kind of way to wiggle out to reread this brisa as saying lo imra rather than li imra. Okay. All right, but it doesn't get any better. Next Mishnah, HaOmer. Person says, Korban, Ola, Mincha, Chatos, Toda, Shlamim, Shani Ochalacha. If he mentions any of these types of korbanos and says that I will eat of yours, Asr, then that's a good neder. In other words, he's saying your food is like an Ola to me, like a korban to me. Rabbi Yehuda Matar, Rabbi Yehuda says no. It's since he we'll see that since he didn't say like a korban, but he just says korban, that doesn't count. Ha-karban, kik-karban, karban, any of these variations, sha'ochalach, that of which I eat of yours, aser, then that is a good neder. La karban lo ochalacha, Rameir oser, is what we just saw before. If you say la karban, which we interpreted as low karban, Rameir says that is a good neder.
So this could not have been the case when the temple was still standing, because you're required to eat a shlamim or a toda.
Right, like the Bechor, right? Except there's no issue of designating versus not designating. Okay, so the Gemara says, Katane, ha-karban, ki-karban, sha'ochalacha asur. if you say any of these, what would you call that first letter? Like I can't think of a name for it, but if you any of these phrases, anything that I eat of yours is usher to me. So the Mishnah said asur, that it is a valid neder. Stama tanak Rabbi Meir. So that initial statement of the Mishnah, which is anonymous, is we're attributing to Rabbi Meir. Because Rabbi Meir doesn't distinguish between Imra and Le'imra or any of these other conjunctions or whatever they are. But the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir had a katane hakarban shalcha asur v'hatanya modim chachamim Rabbi Yehuda ba'omer hakarban v'ha'ola v'hamin v'hachata shalcha shemutar. But don't we see that the rabbis agree with Rabbi Yehuda that if you use any of this hak introduction, then it's not a good neder. Because you're not saying it's like the korban. You're saying by the life of this korban, I swear by this korban, right? But it's not saying it's forbidden like the korban. Where it says lo kasha, not a problem. Hadiyamar hakarban, hadiyamar hakarban. Okay, so we're going to reinterpret based on this minor linguistic quirk, which changes the meaning, right? If you say it's this korban or the korban, it has different meanings. My tama chai korban kamer, because if you say, I can't even keep straight which is which, but if you say ha-korban, I think that would be like by the life of this korban or by this korban, but not that you're saying ha-korban. Ha-korban as a separate word means this is like a korban to me, and that is a valid neder. Katane, we have another statement in the Mishnah. La korban lo ochel cha Rameir oser. Rameir says that if you say la korban, I'm not going to eat, then that is a valid neder. Vaha leisel Rameir miklam lava to shomei. Rav Meir does not have the rule that you can imply a positive from a negative. So if you're saying la korban means not a korban, then yes, we can understand that as everything else is like a korban. But Rav Meir doesn't hold that. Rav Meir does not agree that you can imply a negative from a positive from a negative in someone's statement. So how come Rabbi Meir says here that la korban is effective? Rabbi Abba Nasaka Omer likorban yehei lefikach lo ochalacha. So now we're going to switch back and understand that la korban means like a korban. Okay, fine. Next Mishnah, Omer l'chavero konam pi medaberimcha. I'm making a neder about that my mouth will not speak to you, or yadi osaimcha, that my hand will not work with you, or ragli malechas b'cha, or that my foot will not walk with you. Asr. This is a valid neder. So Gemara wants to remind him. How come? Chomer b'shuos min nedarim. Nedarim b'shuos. We're going to see later that the difference between there are differences between a formal neder and a shvua, right? A neder is a vow, and a shvua we'll call an oath. So chomer ben nedarim shenedarim chalim al mitzvah kiver shus. A neder can, as we've been seeing, you can attach a neder to something that is a mitzvah, right? Like a korban. Mashenkem mishvuos, which you can't do. You can't make a shvua that you're going to do or not do a mitzvah, right? It's not relevant. It's either, if you swear to do a mitzvah, then you're mushvav yamin varsina. You're already obligated, and so it doesn't take any effect. So that's not relevant to our Mishnah. But now here, chomer b'shvuos says shvuos cholos adavar sheyesh b'mamash. The shvua can refer to something that is ephemeral. Mashen came in the darim, but the neder has to latch onto something concrete. So the way that this question understands the Mishnah is, I'm not speaking to you, right? It's an infinitive, right? There's no concrete thing which is called speaking. Reveal answers what seemed to me obvious in the Mishnah, when what he's actually saying is, Yeyaser pi l'diburi. I am making a vow that my mouth will not speak. So my mouth is a real concrete thing, as opposed to speaking, which is an ephemeral thing. Or yadi l'masayim, or you make a nether that my hand will not work, or ragli l'hiluch, my foot will not walk with you. These are real things, and so a nether can take effect on them, and they can. And by the way, this is actually what the Mishnah says, which is why I didn't really understand the question. Because that's what the Mishnah said. A konam of my mouth speaking to you, right? So the Mishnah is explicitly, it seems to me, it's explicit, saying, referring to a concrete thing. So that's why. So we end up saying, yes, that's how we interpret the Mishnah, the way it's written. Okay. Again, not great questions, if you ask me. And it doesn't get any better in the next paragraph. So we had the first paragraph of Kolkine, what is a valid nether? And now the second, the next paragraph is Ve'elu Mutar. And these are all things that are not valid nether. Chulin she'ochalacha. Chulin, that which I eat of yours. Well, that one seems obvious. The Gemara will say, well, isn't that obvious, right? There's nothing forbidden here. Like if I try to attach, if I say that this apple is like that orange, there's nothing wrong with that orange. It's cool, right? So of course that's not a nether that makes it forbidden. But then the other, so we'll see. The Gemara will deal with that. Kibsar chazir. But if I say something like pork, or kavodos kachavim, or like something of idol worship, ka'oros levuvim, like skins. This is some kind of like a skin that has a hole in it at the heart. So I think we've all seen these kind of Aztec, movies where the priest like reaches into the chest of the person and pulls out the heart or something. So apparently this was a form of idol worship with animals. So if you have a skin that it appears that it was used in that way, then that's an avodos kochavim. That's an idol worship item. Convelos utrefos or something should be like these forbidden meats, kishkasim or masim, or creepy crawlers, things which are forbidden to eat, kachalas aranu kitrumaso, like chala to a non-kohen or truma to a non-kohen, mutar. So in all these cases, these are not valid vows. Person says to his wife, you're like my mother. Just like my mother, or you're forbidden to be like my mother, is what he to be intimate with is what he means. So here we annul the nether. We find another reason to annul the nether. So this is an interesting thing, actually. In other words, the Gemara is saying, really, this nether is meaningless, but we want to annul the nether for some different reason, like find an excuse, like we do with other Nedarim, so that a person shouldn't become used to doing such a thing. And the Gemara will discuss a little bit why, like what's wrong with that. It could be disrespectful to your mother. It could be that you get into the habit of making vows about your wife, and then you'll, obviously that's not a positive thing. So we're discouraging, we're trying to make people feel like this is not a good idea to make this nether about your wife, even though it's meaningless. So Talmud Yamar Chulin Shal Chalacha. So Gemara starts with the reason that, again, we're getting back to these nitpicking things of language. Because he said lachulin shal chalacha. A person says lachulin, not chulin. Mashma lo lachulin lahave el karban. So I can understand why that would maybe be a nether, because it would be like lo chulin lahave el karban. Like this should be like not chulin. What is not chulin? sanctified things, right? So you're saying I'm comparing this, or I'm attaching anything that is not chulin, like sanctified stuff, to this item, and therefore it's a good neder. Money must nisin. So who would this mission be like? Irabi Meir, if it's like a Meir Halesle, so this is, as we saw before, this is a negative implying a positive, like not chulin. We're going to imply yes, kachim. The Elo Rabbi Yehuda, so it can't be Rameir, but Elo Rabbi Yehuda, so could it be Rabbi Yehuda? Ainu Resha. This is like a repetition of what we had in the previous, the first mission in Nedarim. So like, what's he telling us here? My answer is, I did Tani the Kibasar Chazir Kabbalas Kachavim Lahavi Katani Chulin. It's just to round out the list. Since really we know this already, but we're rounding out the list of things that it's going to mention, so it includes chulin. So again, that's not really an answer, but it just lets the mission off easy for being not so specific. Or Ravina has a different answer. This is what it means. This is what the mission means. The Elu Mutarin Kichulin. Not that chulin is one of the languages of the vow that we're dealing with, but say these are not valid in the Nedarim, and the food that you're talking about is permissible just like any chulin, like any non-sanctified meat. So that's a clever reread of this. These are things that are just as good as chulin, just as permissible as chulin, if you try to attach a neder to something that's b'sar chazir, chachavim, etc. So Gemara says, "V'ilo tana chulin havamina by shela." So what do you mean that if the Mishnah hadn't said this is just like chulin? So I would think that means that it's unclear. Like a mutarin means that you have to find a way to be matir it. So sounds like the end of the Mishnah, but we'll get to that in a second. Could you think that like in the end of the Mishnah, it says specifically specifically about the vow about your wife. That's when the Mishnah says explicitly you have to find an excuse, you have to find another way out. So it means that the things that came beforehand, they're just mutar because they're not good vows. You don't have to find another way out. So we'll go back to the first explanation, that it's just an inexact language, and that phrase chulin is thrown in there just as an add-on, but it's not. Indeed, we have already studied that in the previous parak. Okay, let's stop here. We're actually, how far did we get here? Yeah, okay, we'll stop here and pick it up tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dov. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, Dan. Bye.
Thank you.